Welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast with your hosts, Cody Hairston and Nick Woods. Here, we want to help you reflect on your week and be honest about your relationship with God. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hey guys, glad to have you in our conversation again this week. Nick is with us as per usual. How's it going, Nick?
Good. As always, it's a blessing to be able to be with you. And I know just from behind the scenes, it's been a little while since we recorded because you've been out of town and we had worked ahead a little bit. So it's nice to get back at it a little bit this time. And I guess the listeners don't really notice that, but it's just always a blessing. And it's been really encouraging. And I think thinking through these things as we've been reflecting on the fruit of the Spirit has been helpful for me. And I hope it's helping everybody as we go through this. We're going to continue, as I mentioned, reflecting on the fruit of the Spirit, specifically gentleness is what kind of we've been thinking about the past few episodes. And today we're going to think about how we can bear gentleness in our homes. And as we've mentioned before, and I think it's just good as we get into this, like our families all look different and our families have different struggles, just like we as individuals have different struggles. And so I think it's important to say, like, our goal should be to bear the fruit of the Spirit in every relationship. You know, we're not just saying like when we come home, we're free from serving the Lord. And I think sometimes we don't say that, and maybe we don't even think that, but like we kind of let our guard down in a different way. And I know we've mentioned that before, but I think that comes up again a little bit as we're talking today. And so I think especially with our families, we should want this to be the primary way that we're bearing the fruit of the Spirit and let the love grow out from our home. So our relationships with our families should be a light to the world. And I think others should see that we're striving to walk by the Spirit.
Yeah, because when it comes to gentleness, maybe in particular of the fruit of the Spirit that we've talked about, like our families will suffer from a lack of gentleness, right? If we are not gentle ourselves, and if we're parents or spouses and we're not bringing that gentleness into our families, that's going to be a problem. And there's really no way around that. As we'll see through the episode today, that we have a couple of different ways of trying to work around that, or to even kind of make excuses for it or make it sound a little more palatable. But it's a problem, right? If we are not gentle within our families are going to suffer. I mean, we've all seen families that function without gentleness, right? People are walking on eggshells. Parents are mean to the kids, and kids maybe they don't feel comfortable talking to the parents, right? You can look, and honestly, sometimes you can even just feel it when they enter into the room, right? This is a big deal. And it's not just a matter of personality. I'm a little more gentle than that person. No, we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit, things that believers of God should be displaying in their day-to-day lives. And if we're not gentle, it's going to affect our relationships with our families. And ultimately, it's going to impact our relationship with God in the negative as well. But oddly enough, although, like I said, I think we do recognize that other families may not be gentle. They may not have a culture of gentleness. But a lot of times it's hard for us to notice a lack of gentleness within our own families. I don't know why that is. I think it's just the curse of being human. We notice bad things in other people before we notice bad things in ourselves. But that's probably a topic for a different episode. Nick, are there any cues that we can use to notice when we are lacking in gentleness in our own families?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think probably we all realize this. Like you were saying, I mean, we can see it when we're watching other families. We notice things, we see actions and behaviors, types of speech. But I think sometimes it's the mental stuff with ourselves that we have to check. We need to judge ourselves to see if we are walking by the Spirit. And I think the challenge with that in this relationship and with this particular topic is it gets to like things we are saying or responses that we have or reactions that we give that we feel justified in doing. And so I think that adds a layer to maybe the difficulty of trying to determine it. But some of the things that I thought of, and this didn't just come from me, but Katie pitched and my wife pitched in a few of these, and Cody and I were talking about this beforehand. But I think that in the vein of self-evaluation, there are some things that we can think about that might show maybe I do need to reflect on working a little bit harder in being a restrained, gentle person in my responses and reactions. One of those, and this is, again, like, this might be like the tip of the iceberg as far as like, oh, I would never think this or say this, but when somebody says my way or the highway, and it's an attitude, it's a way that we carry ourselves. And it's not something, like I said, that I think any of us would likely ever admit to thinking or saying, I hope. But it's an attitude and a reaction that silences others in our family and prevents, I think, true and meaningful discussions, conversations, and reactions. If people are afraid to respond, you're not going to get the right response. My way or the highway flies in the face of passages like Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. If you're carrying yourself like somebody who is only going to approach things if it's done your way, then that is going to prevent you from, I think, restraining your reactions when it's not done your way. So that might be a red flag. If you're making your spouse feel like they're not your companion, you may need to consider that gentleness is a reason for that. Another phrase, another thing that might say, or maybe you've heard somebody say, I'm just not a very tactful person. And this one is kind of like an excuse, right? Usually when you hear somebody say that phrase, it's because they've just said something really harsh, or they're trying to excuse a lack of restraint in their response. So the statement is, oh, I'm just not very tactful. Forgive me for my lack of tact. Well, okay, but also we're called to be gentle. And that lack of tact is your inability to restrain your speech in a way that's going to help somebody respond in an appropriate way, right? So we've been talking through this whole section of gentleness that it's about a response, a reaction, and I think that's where the difficulty comes in. But if you're just excusing it, then people are not going to expect a gentle reaction from you. I think another one in that same vein, I just think honesty is the most important, right? Honesty is the honest thing to say is always the best thing to say. Again, I think that's something that is said to excuse an unrestrained answer, because we all agree that honesty is best. Honesty is best at home. Honesty is best in every relationship. But it doesn't take into account things like Ephesians chapter 4, speaking the truth in love. Thinking about what Peter says in 1 Peter, be ready to defend your hope with gentleness and fear. Yes, be honest, but the way that we should be honest. Let your speech be graceful. Be ready in season and out of season, but do it in an appropriate way. Be thoughtful, be considerate, compassionate. Another one, and one more, and then I'll let Cody give some thoughts about different areas there. But one more that came up was I should just be able to express myself at home however I want to. I need to let the guard down. I need to just be me. I need to, frankly, when I think about that, and I think about this as something that I think we might all struggle with, I mean, at least in our mind, is just thinking like, man, I just need a place to let loose, right? I think it shows the desire to live without restraint, or to live without the confines of what it means to be a bondservant of Jesus. So when we're saying that, what do we really mean? I think is what I'm getting at is like, what are we really saying? Are we just saying like, I need a place to go to where I don't have to live and walk by the Spirit? Or do I need a place to go where I can just live out the desires of the flesh freely? Well, that's not what we're called to. And that certainly doesn't have a place in the home, because what are we telling our spouse with that reaction? What are we teaching our children with that reaction? What kind of reaction responses are we going to get when we come home and say, well, I just have to express myself here? You're teaching people that unrestrained is the way you express yourself. And that's not gentleness. We're bondservants of Jesus in every place and in every relationship. And so those are some things that I thought of. But Cody, what are some other areas in our homes where you think gentleness might be a challenge, or some other things you thought of?
Yeah, I think really logically, the next one to think about is we need to be gentle specifically in our discipline towards our children, if we have them. And I do think this is something that stems from your gentleness with your spouse, kind of like what you've been talking about, that if you can't get the gentleness down with your spouse, then likely you're going to struggle to be gentle towards your children. I'm sure there may be some exceptions to that rule, but I think generally, if you can get it down with your spouse, you give yourself a better chance to be gentle towards your children, and then the inverse would be true as well. But like Nick was just saying, I mean, the opposite of gentleness is a lack of restraint. And I think when it comes to discipline, it's very easy to discipline rashly and without much thought because, frankly, sometimes kids are annoying, right? Sometimes they do things that we just don't really care for, things that frustrate us. And if we are quick to lash out, I mean, that almost always puts us on a track to a lack of gentleness, right? If we're not discerning and measured in the way that we discipline, well, man, I mean, there's just going to be chaos and there's going to be a lack of gentleness. And so we need to, when we're disciplining, just keep that in our mind that yes, our goal is to obviously to instruct, to teach our children, but we need to make sure that we're doing that with gentleness. One helpful thing for maintaining gentleness in your discipline is just incorporating some level of talking in your discipline. And I think each family is going to need to figure out what exactly that looks like. But some level of verbal communication, I think, is good. I'm not an anti-spanking person, but I can say not every offense warrants one, right? Not everything warrants a spanking, some sort of a physical discipline. I think about it, and we talked about this beforehand. Every just legal system has a scale for penalties, right? If I'm not going to do this, but if I were to go out and run a red light, well, guess what? That's not going to be the same penalty as if I killed somebody. Also, something I'm not going to do, right? But those two things they incur different penalties because the offense is different, right? And we look at that and we recognize that's just, that's good. If the person who killed somebody got the same fine as somebody who ran the red light, we would say that that's not a good thing, and vice versa as well. And so sometimes an offense will warrant a spanking, but sometimes an offense will warrant a conversation about the problem. And again, I think every family is going to need to figure out, when children are at that maturity level where is something that can actually happen. But I think from our standpoint as the parents, the people who really need to be aware of the gentleness, I think talking gives us a chance to just kind of breathe and really think through the situation, because that's what brings in the gentleness, when we have that ability to think through it, right? So if we have a chance to take a breath, especially if we're being intentional and strategic about it, that really is going to help us say, okay, look, here's what happened. This is what the measured response needs to be. And depending on the age of the child, it may even be an opportunity for them to bring some new information to light that you may have been unaware of. I'm thinking of maybe some older children, and maybe something happened, and you're like, hey, I know that this isn't the way this is supposed to be, but you haven't considered this other thing, right? There's something involved there that you were just unaware of. Maybe they're a much older child and they missed the curfew, but you didn't know that there was an accident on the highway and they were stuck in bumper to bumper traffic. Something like that. It is good and it is gentle to allow for those moments and those spaces for that communication. And so I think adding in an element of talking about things to your discipline is a good way to just make sure that we are consistent in displaying gentleness.
Yeah, that's really good. And I was thinking too, like there's a couple of things as we have been talking about this. Like one, when we think about like our mindset that I mentioned before, that's like kind of rooting selfishness out so that we can show restraint. And then when we get into, and that applies to specifically, our marriages and our spouse, but then also to our children. And then when it comes to discipline, like if we can't control ourselves, if we're not controlling the way that we think, we're not going to be able to control ourselves in discipline. And so talking is the thing, that slows us down. A gentle answer turns away wrath. Don't provoke your children to wrath, fathers, or bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. So that talking component is so vital. And I think when you slow down, right, that allows for that. I was also thinking as we were talking about this, like if you need to slow down so that you can restrain your response, then pray. prayer is talking to God and asking for help. And how could that not be helpful in showing restraint? So we can't talk about showing restraint without talking about prayer and discipline in every way. And as a parent, I find discipline is really difficult anyways, because it gets so emotional. Sometimes, like I know there's a need for it. I know when it's needed most often, but usually it's about how and to what extent. And sometimes that varies, as Cody said, verbally. Sometimes that varies when we're talking, and the extent to which and what type of punishment. Sometimes it varies with a spanking or with a that type of discipline. The Lord loves the one that He disciplines. I find some of these verses to be so helpful in helping me maintain my response and to restrain my response. Proverbs 23 and verse 13 and 14 says, "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with a rod, you will save his soul from death." Um, when you think about like what we're trying to accomplish, it's training them up to know God, to serve God, and to be faithful to Him. That's it. That's the primary goal. And so when we're disciplining, even as we in whatever ways we might choose to discipline, and specifically we talk about spanking, we have to be restrained in that. It has to be for a purpose. And so as a dad to three boys, two of which are old enough to like know not to talk back, not to defy, not to like wail on each other when they get mad. Like there are certain things that Katie and I have decided like this is an offense that deserves a spanking. And our kids know that, and we tell them that, and we don't hide that from them. Does that mean I don't get angry? No. That means I have to really restrain myself to be not angry in those situations, because I think they know better. And I think all parents understand that frustration, that emotion that leads into wanting or expecting your kids to do or know better than they are acting in any given moment. But I go back to the Lord loves the one He disciplines. A gentle answer turns away wrath. To be restrained in our response teaches our children to be restrained in their response. And so our practice, just in full transparency, is like if we get to that point, a lot of conversations happen, a lot of talking, a lot of options are given, a lot of choices. And when it comes down to it, it's like, all right, now this is it. You're not getting out of this discipline. We're not taking away the spanking, but we are going to talk a great deal about it. So I know every parent you got to figure out each kid and kind of exactly how you're going to do that. But when physical discipline is needed, it's got to be done in a restrained way. The parent is the adult. The parent is the disciple of Jesus. The parent is the one who's saying, I'm walking by the Spirit. And your kids need to know that even in discipline and in punishment, you are trying to bear the fruit of the Spirit. And that's teaching them lessons in what it means to bear the fruit of the Spirit too. So I think this is the most challenging area for me, for parents, when thinking about bearing gentleness in the home, because it becomes hard to prevent emotions from directing your actions as opposed to exercising gentleness and restraint of those emotions.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was talking about being annoyed earlier, because the emotional aspect is what makes it very difficult, because you get frustrated or upset or sad or whatever the case may be, and it's hard to just think clearly. But as we're saying, whether you're talking about the physical aspect, or even if you've incorporated the communication into your discipline, you just need to make sure you're being gentle. Make sure that's at the top of your priority list, because obviously, even if you're talking about things, you can still be abusive in your speech. I think we've all heard that, and maybe unfortunately, maybe somebody has experienced that from their parents, right? That's just the reality of things for some people, and that's not a good thing, right? Even if you're talking about stuff, if you're abusive in your speech, that's a lack of gentleness. But if we can come in and say, hey, okay, we're going to have this conversation and I'm going to be gentle, it really can lead to some really, really good things. Sometimes those talks lead to you apologizing, maybe for not being gentle. And I think that sets a really, really good example for your children on a lot of fronts. First of all, you're showing them you take being gentle seriously, and this was a moment where you didn't do that, and you need to apologize for that. You're showing them that you're not above seeking reconciliation yourself. There's just a lot of good that can come when you say, you know what, we're going to talk and we're going to be gentle about this. Gentleness in the home, it's so important, and no one gets it right all the time. There's a delicate balance that's present whenever we're talking about gentleness in the family, but it's worth it to try to do the best that you can. I'm hoping everybody's familiar with the phrase generational wealth. People live their lives in certain ways and they pass down wealth to ensure that their children, their grandchildren, their great 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 grandchildren are good financially. Normally you hear somebody like an athlete makes it big, they sign a really big contract and they say, oh look, he has generational wealth that he can pass down to future generations. Well, I believe in generational gentleness. I think that if we set the tone in our families, especially those of us who are parents, we can set it up so that, man, our children will be gentle and our children's children and so on and so forth. And they'll be able to experience all those blessings that come from being gentle and being around gentle people as well. And I did say parents earlier, but really, I don't think it matters what role you play within the family, because even if you're a child in a family, it would be good for you to be gentle, right? You're going to kind of help to mitigate maybe some of the lack of gentleness that's coming from the parents, and at the very least, as you work to develop those traits, as you work to show gentleness, you're kind of you're bucking the trend. You know, the buck stops with you now. From you moving forward, you got a chance to for your family to be gentle. But all in all, gentleness is just such an important thing, and we need to make sure that we're applying it within our families, because if you want your family, especially those who come after you, to experience the blessings of gentleness, I think it just starts with you making it a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. That's with all of these things that we've been talking about. As we're reflecting on bearing the fruit of the Spirit, it becomes, is this a priority in your life that you're going to be Spirit led and you're going to walk by the Spirit? So at the end of the day, I think our family is a vital part of our service in the kingdom. You know, it's ground zero in a lot of cases where we're trying to live and work and act in a way that's appropriate and train up children and go out into the world. So bearing fruit of the Spirit in our marriage will make our marriage what God designed it to be. Bearing the fruit of the Spirit as parents will allow us to have a family that is growing in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Bearing the fruit of the Spirit as children will allow our families to live in peace. So there's a lot of good things that we see when we look at all these relationships. So as we kind of wrap up today and wrap up with gentleness, how can you work to show restraint and to give gentleness to your family? And then ultimately, you know, how's God's gentleness changing you?
Thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection Podcast. If you liked this episode, give it a like, a share, or even a comment to let us know how we're doing. We hope we've helped you think, reflect, and be honest about your relationship with God, and we can't wait to see you again next week.